Hi guys, my name is Kristen and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing my top 5 favorites from the first quarter of the month, so January, February, and March, as well as some of my stats. So I thought we would start with the stats. So I'll grab my laptop. Okay, so in the first quarter of the year, I have read 40 books. 40 is a lot. I will say, I don't want people to think that this is what I think people should read, that this is a normal amount of reading. Hey, editing Kristen here. So this didn't come out right. I was feeling very defensive because I had just recently watched a video that was very judgmental towards booktubers who post really big lists of books that they've read constantly, and so I was feeling a little bit like attacked and defensive. What I mean to say is, please don't compare yourself to my quantity of reading or feel like you need to read more in order to be a good reader. I have a lot of free time on my hands because of my life situation, and I read as a coping mechanism for when I am stressed and overwhelmed. And so that is why I have been reading as much. But please don't feel like, oh, I'm nowhere near that number, I need to read more. Like, this is just how many books I happen to have read so far. So 40 books. It's nice, it's a clean, even number. 2 of those 40 books were rereads, and I had 5 DNFs. So obviously that doesn't count towards the 40, I don't count DNFs. I started 13 series, but I don't intend to finish all of those series. If the book that I read was the beginning of a series, I counted it towards that, but that Pestilence, like, I'm not going to read the rest of the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse fantasy romance series. 1 was enough. Okay, so for what I have purchased this month, I have not done the math, but obviously I pay for an ongoing subscription for Scribd, and outside of Scribd, I have bought 4 books. 1 was a physical hardcover, and that was for Namesake by Adrienne Young. The other books that I bought were all ebooks. 1 was one that I had was a reread, that was Deadly Education, and the other ones were spontaneous romance books that I felt like I needed in that moment. Then in terms of the breakdown of how and where I am doing my reading, 47.5% of the books that I read in the first quarter were library books, and that's pretty good, almost half. And then 37.5% was using Scribd. Obviously that does not equal 100, so the rest of the percentage was either books that I bought, books that I already owned, either physical or an ebook, or ones that I was borrowing from friends. Okay, so those are all of the stats. If there are other stats that you're interested in, let me know down below and I will try to include them in the next quarterly wrap-up. So now we'll get into my favorites. We'll start with a couple honorable mentions that I had. The first of which is The Ruin of Kings by Jen Lyons. I am really enjoying this series so far. I am excited to see where it goes. I read the first book pretty voraciously, but if I think about like the enjoyment or my attachment to the characters and things like that, like, it wasn't perfect. And I think that some of the books that I included in the top 5, like, maybe I connected more with several aspects of the book, whereas this one, I really liked it, but there were some missing pieces for me. Oh, that was an adult fantasy book. And the other honorable mention was my favorite Half Night Stand by Christina Lauren, which is a contemporary romance. There is a contemporary romance on one of my favorites. And I think in the moment, I would have said that I liked my favorite Half Night Stand better. I think that the one that I have included in the favorites is going to stick with me a little bit longer. My favorite Half Night Stand is a friends to lovers romance trope where, I think her name was Millie, she ends up sleeping with her best friend Reed. They decide to still be friends, but they are both doing online dating and they end up getting matched, but Millie is using a pretend name. The guy doesn't realize that it's her, and it kind of gets out of hand. And it was really adorable. I really like friends to lovers romance, but I just think the other one is going to stick with me longer. So now we'll get into the top favorites. These are not in any particular order, I don't think. But the first 2 that I'm going to say definitely are. It is the first one and second book in a series. I've included it as one, and that is Crown of Feathers and Heart of Flames by Nikki Pau-Prado. These books took me by surprise. I was expecting to enjoy them, but I was not expecting to fall head over heels in love with this story. It follows Veronica, who is an animage and wants to be a phoenix rider, and Oh man, just there was so much about this book that I love. There's a Mulan element, there is a hate to friend to lover element, there is like a female empowerment element, there is complicated family dynamics and trauma. It has like little tiny snippets at the beginning of each chapter. In the first book, they are from letters from history, and in the second book, I think it was from a diary. I am not that, don't quote me on that. Similar to the Mistborn series, where not only are you getting the story that's happening, but you're also getting these historical snippets that show you what happened before that's really relevant. I really liked the way that it explored different people's morals and values and philosophical differences in the use of direct comparisons between a few different family members. So I was so caught up with Crown of Feathers. I immediately read the second book, Heart of Flames, and was not disappointed. The dynamic between the characters changes a little bit. There is a new point of view that was fairly disturbing. One thing that I will say is that I do personally find some of the POVs a little bit more entertaining and drive the plot a little bit more. Particularly, I feel like Veronica and Tristan's chapters I enjoy more. Saib's chapters are much quieter, but his stuff, his plot always plays a very important role towards the end, and so you need to have all of that in order to have this amazing climax at the end with everyone involved. This also, if you are into animal companions, there are Phoenix animal companions here, and I would say they're not like, they're sort of in the middle of the scale in terms of like, if you know, like the Farborn, where they're sort of communicate with the dragons, but they don't really have personalities, or like they don't really talk, is one end of the scale. And I'm trying to think of an animal companion that is super talkative. I don't know. The one that's like a distinct individual, it's sort of in between that, where the Phoenixes do have personalities and they do sort of communicate with their Phoenix rider back and forth a little bit. So it's in between. So those are two books, but I'm going to use it as one, and definitely they are the favorites from the first quarter of the year. Next up was This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Matar and Max Gladstone. This is a sci-fi novella following two spies on different sides of a futuristic war that uses time traveling, and both of these agents are trying to change the past in order to give their agency a better future. Red and Blue are the names of these two agents. They're not given any other names, and they begin communicating via letters, initially as taunts as they try to sabotage each other's plans, and they start asking each other questions, and they get to know each other, and it develops into this overwhelmingly beautiful romance. It is sort of a sapphic romance. Both Red and Blue use female pronouns, however, neither of them are really human. This book I both wanted to consume voraciously and also slowly savor every single moment. I think this is the most quotable book that I have read in a really long time. I'm not someone who collects quotes, and this was audio, so it was even more challenging. But there were so many lines that I wanted to save. I actually don't know which one, but one of the authors is apparently a poet, and you can really see that. The letters are so evocative. Red and Blue connect on such a deep level and talk about everything from what it is to live, to love, to feel, to have purpose, to hunger, to crave, to lose a sense of purpose, to what is it to be alone. It doesn't have a ton of plot. The main focus is the relationship growth between those two characters, but there is a surprisingly dramatic ending. Next is the contemporary romance, Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren. Love and Other Words is a friends to lover and also second chance at love romance, two of my favorite romance tropes. Macy and Elliot meet when they are young, I think around the age of 13. Her dad buys this summer weekend home that is right next door to Elliot. They meet, they bond over books of all things. They eventually wind up dating when they are in their late teens, but something really horrible happens and Macy and Elliot do not see each other for like, I think 11 years. This is a book where I think the back and forth timeline was done really well. It is adorable to watch their friendship turn into something more, and the really amazing friendship and connection that they have as kids. And then also to see them years down the line, after having not seen each other for years, with a second chance at love romance. I don't just want to see them fall in love the first time. I want to see them fall back in love for a reason and overcome the things that broke them up in the first place. And that is where Love in Other Words really succeeds. I felt attached to both of the timelines. Sometimes I feel like with the back and forth timeline, I feel like we only get the intimacy scenes when they are young, and that's not the case. We get a little bit of both. Why do I want to read about 16-year-olds fumbling around with each other? It's not really what I'm looking for. But anyway, maybe I should edit that out. The thing that broke them up was not so horrible that it couldn't be overcome, and it felt like a realistic thing to have kept them apart for all of these years, but that then can still be reconciled. Loved it. Kind of want to reread it again while I'm sitting here speaking about it. Okay, the next favorite from the first quarter is A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms by George R.R. Martin, which is a collection of short stories following Dunk and Egg. Dunk is a hedge knight, self-titled Sir Duncan the Tall, and Egg is none other than the child, Aegon Targaryen, the, I think, great-grandfather of Daenerys. Dunk is one of those hilarious characters who is fairly self-deprecating, sees himself as being really dumb, and there is like this repetitive line that is used in each 3 of the stories. Dunk the lunk, thick as a wall. And he also has this grandiose idea of his abilities as a knight. Because you're hearing it from his perspective, you kind of get caught up into it, and you're used to stories where your main character does turn out to be really good at something, so you always think that like Dunk is gonna pull through. And spoilers, like he's just not that good of a knight. His friendship with Egg is also really adorable, and they just get into the most hilarious of hijinks, but also really heart-wrenching, like bittersweet moments happen in each of the 3 books. But I think one of the best things about Dunk and Egg is that it talks a lot about what it means to be a knight in Westeros, and Dunk, while not of great physical prowess as a knight, actually embodies the true sense of the knight, and that is that he is there to protect the people and to do what is right. Obviously, because I have like said this was laugh out loud and like hijinks and all of that, it is obviously a lot lighter of a story than The Song of Ice and Fire, but it still has that nostalgic sense of being back in Westeros. The people are not all the same because this is, I think, 100 years before, and Dunk and Egg are adorable and hilarious and heartwarming, and this was just a thoroughly enjoyable read from start to finish. I did listen to the audio, which is narrated by Harry Lloyd, I believe is his name, which is the actor that played Viserys in the series Game of Thrones, and he did an amazing job. Finally, the last book, the last favorite for the first quarter, is The Girl in the Tower by Catherine Arden, which is the second book in the Winter Night trilogy. I thought that The Bear and the Nightingale was okay. Like, it was good, I really liked it, but there were very distinct things that made it be a good book and not a all-time new favorite book for me. Girl in the Tower totally made up for what was missing in the first book. Vassia is a young girl who can both see and communicate with the house or like spirit elves and stuff like that. There is a animal companion who is a horse called Solvay. He is a distinct personality. I should have used that as the reference. That's so silly from earlier. He is a distinct personality separate from Vassia. They are sort of like 2 separate entities who are just like buddies. Because this is a second book in a series, I can't say too much about the plot of the second book. She's someone who, in this time period as a woman, has essentially 2 options available to her, and that is become a nun or get married and have kids. And she is not into either of those. Just like wants to see the world, experience life, and live. Kind of similar to like Addie LaRue. If you liked Addie LaRue, this is a very different book, but it's sort of similar vibe in that sense. In this book, Vasya has an experience where she is essentially shown what her life would have looked like if things had been a little bit different. And it is sort of very like female empowering in that sense, that you get to see her like rage against the restrictions set on her and her life. She has a little bit more agency in this book. The plot overall has a lot more sense of drive and purpose than The Bear and the Nightingale did. And she doesn't always do what you want, but she does what she would do. And I liked that it was genuine to her character, even though it was frustrating. I totally even forgot to talk about Moravko. There is a little teensy bit of romance in this book, but not a lot. If you read The Bear and the Nightingale and you felt like it was pretty good, like it was okay, but it was missing some stuff, that stuff is probably in the second book, and I think you should give it a shot. So those are my top 5 favorites and honorable mentions for the first quarter of the year. April has been good so far. So I already have a couple books that I feel like are going to be vying for the top spot in the second quarter. That is it for me today, guys. Have a great day. Bye.